Hey, welcome to Relationship Alchemy Live. Today I'm going to be talking about stepping back to step forward. And I'm so excited about this topic because I think we don't spend enough time really acknowledging how hard it can be to see what needs to change when you're in the middle of your life. So if you're watching live, I'd love to know, and drop a live letting me know if you're here. And if you're watching the replay, let me know too, because I'd love to know who's with me and who's getting something out of these trainings. If you're interested in having the show notes from today's show, you can drop the word notes below and I will get that information to you about how to access the show notes. So let's come back to 1 second. We're going to, okay. I'm going to come over here to the comments, see who's with me. If we haven't met already, I'm Marie Elizabeth Molly, and I'm a relationship transformation expert. I help people transform the patterns that are getting in the way of love and connection in their relationships, not only romantic, familial, personal, relationships with themselves, how they're showing up at work. Really, we're in relationship with everything in life. And so it's important to understand what our default patterns are that show up in certain situations, and then how to change them for the better. So that's what I help people do, is change their patterns to more effective ones that feel better to them and everybody around them. So today, my topic is step back to step forward. And we can get so bogged down in the day-to-day that we lose sight of why we're doing it all and what we really care about and what's really important. So you got to take a step back and gain some perspective. I find it super helpful to do that, to take a step back, gain some perspective, and come back in to the situation. And it can be hard to do, right? When you're in the middle of a thing and you're trying to get clarity, the more natural response is to just stay hyper-focused on the thing you're trying to figure out. However, your brain, that's not always the optimal scenario for your brain to do its best work. And so I'm going to talk today about how taking a step back can help you get clarity and perspective, and it's also good for your brain, and then give you some tips for how to do that effectively. So the first point I want to make is that it's hard. I can't remember where I heard this first, but I did hear this somewhere. So if you know where I heard it, let me know below. But when you're inside the jar of your life, you can't read the label on the jar because you're inside the jar. Another way of saying this is when you're a fish swimming in water, you don't know what water is. It's just the thing you swim in, right? So our lives are similar, where when you're inside of something that you need to get perspective on, you can't get perspective from in there because you're in it. So by nature, you have to step outside to be able to read the label on the jar, or you have to, well, in the case of a fish, it's not like you're going to step outside the ocean. So that metaphor doesn't quite hold here, but you got to give yourself some space. Now, this can look like taking a break and walking into another room and doing something else for a bit and just letting your brain recharge and recover. This can look like taking a day on the weekend to really intentionally journal and sit with what's happening. So you're giving yourself space to focus on the thing, but you're still focused on the thing. The first option was stepping away from the thing and letting your mind do something else. Have you ever noticed how when you're trying to sort out a problem and you put it down for a bit and you go take a shower, and often the solution pops up in your mind, or the same thing, you go take a walk and the solution pops up in your mind, or you go to sleep and in the morning, bing, there's the solution. All of those are examples of how you've given your brain a rest. You've let your brain shift to something else, and your subconscious is still working on it behind the scenes. And eventually you get the conscious solution. Like it gets lobbed over to the front of your brain, to the conscious mind, and boom, all of a sudden you know what you need to do. So you want to choose, this is the second point I want to make, is to choose how often you want to step back and in what way. So the first scenario is just taking a break whenever you're saturated. But if you want to do something more deliberate, where you go out of town for a night, or you go to a cafe, you get out of the house and you go to a cafe, think about, for your particular life, how often would be useful to do this, and how to work it in. For couples, I said there's a similar process to this that I often suggest, which is to meet, whether weekly, monthly, quarterly, and have a deliberate evening where you talk about how you're doing. Both, here's what's most present for me mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and socially. Socially has been very impacted the last few years, but we're starting to be more social again, so we can talk more about like what our desires are socially. And each person shares what's happening for them in those 5 arenas, and then talk about how they can support one another through the relationship to expand in whatever ways that each of them is needing to expand. So you're having the relationship support each of your growth and expansion. And you're also touching base on, how does a connection feel? How are we doing as a couple? Is there anywhere we need to put our attention on? So similarly to that, which is a different process that I teach, similarly, for you personally in your own life, it's good to take some time to reflect. And when our lives are so busy, as mine is, and I'm sure yours, it can be hard to take that space unless you put it on the calendar, unless you decide that this is a thing you're going to do. So decide, how often do you want to step back and how? Because it's so key. The third point I want to talk about is sometimes you just have to change up the view. And what I mean by this is, when you're always looking at the same 4 walls of your house and you're doing the same movements, you go to the gym. If you are going to a gym, you go to the same gym, you go to the same coffee shop, you do the thing. Like we get lulled in a kind of complacency by routine is wonderful in a lot of ways. And there's a way that routines can engender complacency. So sometimes you just have to change up the view, like drive home a different way and see what you notice, or walk home a different way than you usually do. Walk down a street you don't usually go down. See what that wakes up in you. Travel to a city you don't typically go to, or a town. That kind of thing. So shaking up the view can sometimes reveal, again, allowing space to reveal new things to you about whatever it is you're wanting to figure out about your life. When I was 17, I used to do a lot of musical theater and stuff. And when I was 17, I was in a theater program, a summer theater program for high school kids. And each of us had a solo in the final show. And my solo was a super sad song. And at the end of the show, this kid who had been in a different program, but was also there that summer, he came up to me and said, "Oh my God, your song was so sad. It made me cry. I can't believe it. I was so embarrassed. I cried in front of my mother. It was mortifying." And I realized in that moment the power of taking people out of their regular daily experience. So in the case of this kid, it's like his regular daily relationship with his mother and the way he showed up and the way she showed up and how he knew to be as a growing teen boy, all the conditioning that teen boys have to navigate. So taking him out of that so profoundly that he experienced raw emotion and was able to allow him, couldn't stop feeling it, it spilled over, he cried. And then returning, now at 17, I didn't have the wherewithal for this last bit, but now as a coach, I do, returning him to his life after the show with maybe a new perspective on the importance of being able to connect to yourself emotionally, or how beautiful it is to be so moved by a piece of music that you actually cry, So in a coaching session, it's similar. Someone comes into a coaching session, we coach, they see things, and then they can go back to their life with an action plan, for one, but also with a new perspective on the situations that daily occur. So sometimes you just got to change up the view. Go to a concert, go to a theater production, take a retreat, travel somewhere, walk down a different street, go to a different cafe than you usually do. Hopefully the coffee is still good. Go to a new restaurant. In this way, by changing up the view sometimes, it allows you to shake up the routine that your brain tends to lock into when you're doing the same thing day in, day out. And you can hopefully see things with a new perspective and have some kind of insight or revelation about what's working, what you want to change, where you want to go, maybe some new thing you want to do with your life. I'd love to know if there are any questions or ahas so far. So if you're here live and want to drop that in the comments, I'd love to know what's landing, because I'm a fan. There's so many places where we can just take a beat, take a step back that allows us to step forward. One of the common spaces that I recommend doing this, which is different than doing like a big overall evaluation of your life or something that needs to change, but on a daily basis, when you get triggered or activated and you're getting heated in a conversation, take a pause. Let the person know you'll be back. Leave the room. Ask yourself, what just got activated? What do I need here? And then when you're centered again, you go back and you share it with the person. Oh, wow, such and such really activated me. I saw that it was connected to this thing that my dad did when I was 5. So it's not really about you. And you just fell into that pothole. And if there's a request that needs to be made, you make the request. This is something I teach quite a bit. And you might have heard it before, maybe not. I think I've even done a podcast episode about it. So if you look for Do Your Part to Create Connection, that podcast episode is going to lay out this 4-part process for what to do when you get activated in a conversation. And in this way, stepping back from the conversation allows you to step forward when you're centered and you're ready again, and will likely lead to much less wreckage than if you just stayed in there hammering, through your activation, trying to make your point, be right, blame the person, whatever it is. Much more effective to take a step back, and then you can really move forward together more effectively. So there's lots of instances where this idea of stepping back to step forward applies. Let's say there's a business thing you're trying to sort out. You're not sure you want to offer a program, or, there's a new program you want to offer it. You're not sure if it's right. Anytime you find yourself embroiled in trying to figure things out is an opportunity to step back. It's an opportunity to take a break, allow your other than conscious mind to chew on the thing for a bit, go exercise, take a walk, dance to a song, take a bath, take a nap, shower, anything that just occupies your mind with something else for a bit, so that you can come back and actually step forward instead of going around in circles. That's super helpful for getting into flow. In fact, it's actually a necessary stage of flow. So the 4 stages of flow, just to run them down really quickly, as researched by Stephen Kotler, the first stage is really the struggle phase. It's like you're doing the research, you're trying to write the thing, you're figuring out what you're going to do. It's the first stage where things are not quite moving yet, but you're trying to get started. Then the next stage is release. That's when you go take the shower, you take the walk, you exercise, you get your mind off the thing that you're trying to do. Then you're primed. After you've done the release part, you're primed to come back and hit flow and actually see forward movement on the thing you're trying to create. And then the final stage is recovery. So that's when you nourish yourself. Why? Because flow is a very expensive state for your brain. It uses a lot of brain chemicals. And at some point, they're going to be depleted and you need to replenish. And that's when you eat, rest, watch some TV, take a sleep, go to sleep, stretch. If you've been doing this 4-part flow model with respect to exercise, that's the stretch part of your exercise routine. That's where you're doing mobility exercises and stretching and recovering. You're not pushing in that recovery stage, and that sets you up to begin the next struggle phase where you're working hard again to get going. So if there are no questions, I'm going to go ahead and recap what I've covered today, which has been mostly flowing. So I'm going to do my best to recap, because I don't have it super laid out this time. I wanted to just see what emerged. Didn't know I was going to talk about flow, for example, but that's a key component. And you can think about flow when it comes to your relationships, your exercise, your creativity, your work. There's so many ways to apply this 4-part flow cycle. And part of it involves stepping back. You step back in order to come back and hit flow. And that's really the key we're talking about today. Before I recap, I want to tell you about a retreat that I'm offering in January in Mexico. It's called the Alchemy Experience. It's a 4-day experience for women. And it's really designed to be that step back from your life so you can see clearly and vision clearly what you want and begin to embody the energetic, the beingness, the you who can have that thing that you're wanting to create, who has the life with plenty of love and connection and joy and success and all the things that you desire. So that's coming up. And if that's interesting, you want to hear more about it, drop the word alchemy in the chat and we can have a conversation. So now I'm going to recap. Today we're talking about step back to step forward. Sometimes you get so bogged down in your daily life that you lose sight of why you're doing it all. Is this even what I want? All these doubts can arise just because you're so in it. you have to take a step back sometimes, gain some perspective so that you can move forward more clearly. And it can feel like it's super hard to take the time and energy to make that step back, to take that break, but it's really important. And taking that step back not only helps you gain clarity and perspective, but it also respects how your brain works best, which is not to chew on something endlessly all the time forever. That's not typically the way that you're going to get to a solution. The first point I want to make is that it's hard to see the label on the jar when you're inside the jar. So when you're in the situation or the creative problem you're trying to solve, or the relationship or the health issue, when you're inside of that, it's like you're inside the jar trying to read the label, and you can't see the label because you're inside. So at some point you got to step out so you can see the label more clearly. In your daily life, you want to choose how often to step back and what that looks like. So depending on what you're working on, that can look different ways. First way is if you're having a discussion with somebody, you're getting activated and you're about to say something that's not going to serve the conversation to move forward, that's a spot where you could step back, pause, say, hey, I need to recenter myself. I'll be back. Go take care of yourself and then come back to the conversation when you feel more centered and ready to move the conversation forward in a constructive way. Another way of stepping back you might want to consider is, if you're in a relationship, to have a State of the Union conversation with each other weekly, monthly, quarterly. I'd suggest at least quarterly, to check in. How am I doing? How am I feeling in general in my life? And how are you feeling in your life? And how are we feeling together? And is there anything we need to put our attention on so that we feel better together? That's a way of stepping back from your relationship to look at it together so that you can move forward more effectively. Also, you can take a larger step back. If you really need to gain perspective on your life, maybe you go stay at a hotel overnight and really give yourself space to unwind and journal and spend time with yourself and allow some clarity to rise up. You could go on a retreat where you're led in activities like that. You could take a vacation and spend some time on your vacation. Between having fun, spend some time also self-reflecting. There's so many ways to step back, and you want to be deliberate about how you do it. And the important thing, which is the third thing I wanted to cover, is to change up the view sometimes. So if you always take the same route to the same coffee shop and you go to the gym the same way every time, if you're going out to a gym, or you go to the store every way, the same time every time you go. If you walk around the block the same way every single time, your mind will start to get lulled into routine and start losing some of its aliveness, its responsiveness, its awakeness. We are pattern recognition beings, right? So if we're always offering the mind the same pattern, it's like, oh yeah, I see that, it kind of gets sleepy. So by shifting up things, maybe the way you drive home from the store, or take a walk in a different direction, or sit, brush your teeth with your left hand sometimes if you're right-handed, or vice versa. If you're left-handed, brush your teeth with your right hand, just for the experience of feeling what it's like to do something awkward and different. All of those are ways of stepping back from the routine and allowing something fresh to emerge. Again, I'm Marie Elizabeth Molly. This has been Relationship Alchemy Live, and today's topic was to step back, to step forward. And you're welcome to reach out to me if you have questions or would like to connect. I'm here. And again, if you are interested in hearing more about my upcoming women's retreat, which is called the Alchemy Experience, happening in Mexico at our luxurious villa, drop the word alchemy below and we can talk. Hope you have a beautiful evening. And until next time, remember that a great relationship starts with you.